Now in America, the president, the Senate, the House, the Supreme Court will be all Republican, the same party. And this has also happened in Poland. So let me give you some examples of what you're in for. Between 2015 and 2023, the ruling party of Poland was PiS. They won the majority and they could do with the country whatever they wanted. One of the biggest things they did was a nearly all ban on abortion. 99% of abortions are banned in Poland. Women are not allowed to take abortions. Any doctor that helps women get an abortion will go to jail if found that they were helping them. So women now have to travel outside of Poland to do these procedures, and if they were found to do that, then again they would go to jail. You are not allowed to get an abortion even if it threatens the mother's life, and there was actually a famous case of when a woman died because she had to give birth to a stillborn. There were actually massive protests in Poland to protest this law. All women went out on the streets wearing black. It was dubbed as a Black Monday, which is basically when women wore black and they refused to go to work, they refused to go to school to protest this law. But despite all this turnout, they still did it. Here is another example. Women went out on the streets in more than 147 cities across Poland, and yet the ruling party still banned abortions. The second thing they did was basically introduce LGBT-free zones because they hated gay people so much. Aside from our president saying gay people are not people, they are an ideology, this is what happened. LGBT-free zones were created and implemented by local provinces, counties, and municipalities. Over 90 municipalities declared an LGBT-free zone. Around half of the country was an LGBT-free zone. And here is the proof. This is what the map looked like. All these red places declared themselves as LGBT-free zones. In the EU, we have this thing where cities partner with other cities in other countries to be like sibling cities. And because of this, so many cities cut ties with Poland. Because of this, the European Commission blocked 150 million euro funds for LGBT-free zones and blocked a 42 billion euro payment from the COVID recovery fund. Of course, America is not part of the EU, therefore they will not have any repercussions if they make any laws like this, therefore they will be fearless. On top of this, newspapers gave out these lovely stickers which businesses could use to declare themselves as an LGBT-free zone. Now, what the ruling party did to achieve this was basically change the judicial system. They made it so that the court was selected by the party and the president so that there will be no blockage of any laws that they wanted to make. This meant that the judges were basically pawns in their game and they could pass any law that they wanted. After eliminating constitutional checks, the government then moved to curtail the activities of NGOs and independent media, restrict freedom of speech and assembly, and reduce the qualifications required for civil service jobs in order to fill these positions with party loyalists. There is always a lot of corruption and embezzlement going on in governments, but with this law, it meant that anyone from the party found guilty of any of this would just be set free. Because again, the judges were selected by the political party, which meant that they would never be found guilty of any of it. This was obviously huge during COVID because a lot of money they took for themselves. They got fake PPE, which actually were not even real companies, all of that stuff. The reason why they were in power for so long is because they wanted to brainwash even more people, so they took over the main TV channels. Think of it like the BBC. We have this broadcasting channel called TVP, which is TVP, and all their main news broadcasting anchors were selected by the ruling party. All day long, 24/7, there was right-wing propaganda in favor of the party and everything that you could think of negative for the other parties. They wanted to curtail the freedom of speech, so they wanted to ban the most liberal channel, which was TVN. TVN is owned by Discovery Channel, which is an American company, and they believed that this was a threat to the freedom of Poland, the independence of Poland, therefore they wanted to ban that channel. They broke the constitution so many times, they did not care, and because of this, the EU actually fined Poland 1 million euros per day. Do you know who else they hated? Yes, you guessed that right, immigrants. They were so against immigrants and protecting the Polish values that they actually tried to create a referendum to stop immigrants coming into Poland. However, the referendum failed to reach a 50% turnout, which means that the referendum wasn't valid. They, however, created a wall border similar to the border in America between America and Mexico to stop immigrants coming from Belarus into Poland and into the EU. Belarus was basically pushing immigrants through Poland into the EU, and Poland stopped this by building this wall. Some of those poor immigrants were stuck in that space between the Polish army and the Belarusian army, and they were denied humanitarian aid. No one was allowed to enter to help them, and unfortunately a lot of them died. There was a lot more that the ruling party did over the 8 years, but these were some of the biggest controversies around the world that happened. And unless you were a Polish white man living in Poland, your life was probably hell. I know a lot of people don't care about politics, but this result is actually scary, and America actually has a lot of influence on the world and the politics of other countries. So this result is also scary for other countries. A lot of these things happen in Poland after Trump won last time. So just imagine the things that will happen after he just won now.
If you want to work in Poland, if you want to respect our culture, if you want to pay taxes, come to our services, ask for the permission, ask for a visa for 6 or 10 months. It's not a problem at all. We are not North Korea. Yeah. You cannot come in or leave the country. You can, but you have to do it legally. And first of all, you have to respect our culture. You have to respect our faith. You have to respect our society. You have to respect our tax system. You have to pay taxes. You have to be here legally. As I said, we haven't had even one terrorist attack. Why? Because there was no illegal migration. And we have to keep it that way. I don't care if they call us racist. I don't care if they call us nationalists. I care about my country and about my family. This is what I said to Cathy Newman. She was shocked. How can you say that? But Jean-Paul Juncker called you a racist. I don't care. He can call me a pink elephant. I care about my family, about the safety of my homeland. That is why I love Poland. We're gonna finish this interview. We're gonna go out and you will see how beautiful and safe Warsaw is. You know that, I know that, and many of the leftists knows that Poland is different, it's safe. This is why it's worth to fight for Poland. And I must say, I do believe and I think that Poland is last stronghold of Christianity and normality in Europe.
But why do you guys stay a part of this club if you so fundamentally disagree with the Germans and the others on absolutely everything? Why do you bother?
Because Germany and Russians, they want to drink Dom Perignon and they want us to drink water. That is the difference. So if they want us to have a lunch together and split the bill, they have to eat the same thing and they drink the same thing. The club means that we are equal. We have the same rights and the same duties, but it doesn't work this way. So first of all, it's not us who started this madness. It's Germany who started.
Right.
Angela Merkel was looking for cheap labor, so she found out that they want to work, that they want to contribute to this society by their taxes. They don't want to learn language. And then she decided, okay, so let's spread them around. Let's say that this is our responsibility, not mine. And then we're going to get rid of this problem. No. We're not going to take any of those. It's not our war. It's not our colony. We never had any colonies in our history. So we want to be a partner. We want to be equal partner with the same rights and the same duties. That's why I keep repeating, not even one illegal will come to Poland ever.
Passed the law that we can use live bullets now. So if you want to come to Poland, you will be killed. If you don't want to be pushed back, do not come to Polish border, because we just passed the law that our soldiers, Coast Guard or whatever, they can use live bullets to kill. That is the difference. Because I can see the difference between, let's say, Heathrow Airport,
right,
Miami International,
sure,
when you're trying to cross the border without passport, what they would do? They would shoot you. If you would try to run through migration, right, the customs, they would shoot you. So what is the difference between Miami International, Heathrow, or any other place, airports, and the green border, where they trying to go, they trying to come through the forest? So now Polish forces services are allowed to use live bullets and kill.
Poland is getting ready for war with Russia, at least according to German tabloid newspaper Bild. In fact, both Sweden and Norway have called on their respective citizens to also get ready for war with Russia. And German Defense Minister Boris Pistorius expects an active conflict within the next 5 to 8 years. In a recent interview, Poland's defense minister emphasized that he very carefully considers every single word he says, and that it's the job of the defense minister to prepare for the worst case scenario. My friends, I want to ask you, why are European leaders preparing their citizens for war? Russian officials have multiple times stated that they're not seeking conflict with them nor NATO. So why all the warmongering from the European side? The truth is, at least from where I'm sitting, is that Western defense officials are trying to scare their own people into supporting increased investment into the military-industrial complex at the expense of the well-being of their own citizens. Most Europeans are already struggling with higher costs of living, crumbling infrastructure, high taxes, and high inflation, and they have to continue to suffer so that the military gets more budget cash. But anyway, I want to know from you, what would a potential war between Poland and Russia look like? After all, and correct me if I'm wrong, but doesn't Poland always get dunked on when it comes to wars?
And now, back to our regularly scheduled program.
We control your bodies. Hey bitch, we control your bodies. Guess what? Guys win again, okay? Men win again. And it's your body, my choice.
In fact, Poland is the most powerful country in Europe. Poland is located in the heart of Europe and is an important hub connecting Eastern Europe and Western Europe. As a member of NATO, if Poland is attacked, other member states need to provide military assistance. Poland also maintains close military cooperation with the United States, obtains advanced weapons and equipment, and enhances its defense capabilities. Russia is the main potential threat to Poland, but it needs to cross Belarus or Ukraine to reach Poland. The relationship between these two countries and Russia is complicated and changeable. Secondly, after Finland joined NATO, Russia's supply lines in the Baltic region were further challenged, making its military operations in the Baltic region more difficult. Moreover, most of Poland is the flat Po plain, with many moraine lakes in the north, low hills in the south, and concave in the middle, which can slow down the enemy's offensive speed and provide Poland with a natural barrier and cover. It can be said to be the most difficult country to invade in all of Europe.
Who is Karol Nawrocki, Poland's new right-wing president? Nawrocki, a historian with no experience in frontline politics, won the election on June 1st in a close victory. Turnout was over 71%, the highest recorded since the restoration of Polish democracy in 1989. The election of Nawrocki, a conservative who aligns himself with Trump, indicates Poland could be moving towards a more nationalist direction. The Polish president does not hold the same level of power as the president of France or America, but can veto laws. Analysts believe Nawrocki's win will effectively challenge Prime Minister Donald Tusk by blocking large parts of his legislative agenda.
Karol Nawrocki's platform leans heavily nationalist, campaigning under the slogan, Poland First, Poles First. He's known for his anti-migrant Eurosceptic rhetoric, framing Poland as a sovereign nation that should resist deeper European integration. Here's how he put it.
Nie zgadzam się na to, aby Unia Europejska decydowała o naszym wymiarze sprawiedliwości, o naszej edukacji, aby ideologia Zielonego Ładu niszczyła polskie rolnictwa. My wchodziliśmy do innej Unii Europejskiej. My wchodziliśmy do Unii Europejskiej, która jest wspólnotą gospodarczą.
Nawrocki is also an outspoken admirer of Donald Trump. Much like Trump, he campaigns on opposing immigration and rejecting what he calls woke values and prioritizing bilateral ties with the United States over Brussels. He's even met Trump at the White House and reportedly received his endorsement. He's also an amateur boxer, often showcasing his skills on stage.
Poland just elected a nationalist right-wing president, Karol Nawrocki. Let's talk about what it means for Poland, Europe, and the world. So Poland is now in something called legislative gridlock, where the parliament is controlled by the centrist, liberal, and pro-EU civic coalition, while the presidency is going to be under Nawrocki, who is a right-wing nationalist. Both fundamentally disagree with each other, and whenever parliament wants to pass laws, Nawrocki can veto them. So essentially not much is going to change, which is a problem for the parliament, because it's going to be very difficult for them to do things. That means Poland's conservative laws are likely to stay. Poland has almost a complete abortion ban and no legal recognition for same-sex couples. But the most unexpected outcome in all of this is that we could potentially see a Trump Tower in Warsaw, or a new Trump golf course, or some sort of luxury resort. Trump's been using his presidency for personal deals in Albania, Vietnam, the Middle East, and Poland now could be next. Nawrocki is a Trump favorite, and he was officially endorsed by the Trump administration. The reason why Trump is so interested in Nawrocki is because Poland is a very promising and growing economy, and Trump probably wants to get some of the Polish real estate for his business. And obviously Nawrocki and his nationalist, isolationist, right-wing views perfectly aligned with Trump. Nawrocki was also endorsed by Viktor Orban from Hungary, who's been cozying up to Russia and pushing away from the European Union. And Nawrocki is also skeptical of the EU and opposed to Ukraine joining NATO and the European Union. Now, if you don't like Nawrocki, the good news for you is that as president, he won't be able to act on any of these ideas because he will not have parliament support. And yes, the president in Poland does have veto power, but other than that, he isn't that powerful. Unlike the United States, Polish presidents just don't have that much executive power. If you're European or American, what happens in Poland is important. Poland has the largest army in the European Union. It's the biggest NATO contributor relatively to its GDP, and it's one of the fastest growing economies in Europe.
87% of Poland identifies as Polish, so white. A couple years back, that was 99%. That is an existential crisis that has resulted in Poland turning much more to the right. Particularly, that trigger was 2015, the Syrian refugee crisis. I was living in Europe as that was happening, and wow, was that shift very different to what I was accustomed to, particularly having to agree to the reality that I cannot position my US-centric ideology of politics and governance into Europe, particularly Poland, given that at that time it was a vast majority of white. So that was a unique lack of diversity that very much codified culture and existence, right? So when that was being disrupted, that's when they started to push back on that differences, and they didn't very much see that difference. And I remember meeting a Polish girl, and she was confused as to why the United States had to racialize everything, and I had to accept that this girl lived in a country where 99% of the population looked like her. So in that reality, they were not going to understand the United States of America, which is created on that diversity, right? But in that reality, their perception of what is governance and what is culture and what is diversity is different from that of the United States. So while it is concerning, it is not surprising that Poland voted how it did, but it does also touch on an anxiety that I had, which was that if Russia gets Ukraine, and then Ukraine can easily be used in order to go through Denmark, which I thought was crazy when I was thinking about this. But what's next to the Ukraine? That is Poland. If Poland has a Polish Trump, then our Trump can actually just swim over to Denmark and then from there get Greenland. They don't need Canada anymore. So maybe I'm just throwing out random theories into the air, but I do think that's it's either going to be economic pressure of forcing Canada to allow us to that Greenland, or having it through what I thought was much more unrealistic, which is the European route. But hey, maybe if you force over Denmark to give it over lawfully, then maybe you don't need to use force or to get Canadian approval, right? So this is uncertain times, but it is very interesting to know that although it's concerning, it's not new that Poland was moving much more to the right. It was happening even before we noticed that we were doing it as well, because I was there in 2015 and Poland was already going to the right. And lest we not forget that Poland at that point in World War II literally gave over 3.3 million of its Jews. Alright, so that's why I position that states just caring about our economic prosperity versus that of humanity is going to give that same legacy that Poland has, and ultimately it continues our repetition of to the right.
Britain must wake up and defend our borders like Poland does. Imagine a flood of illegal immigrants surging through your nation's borders, unchecked, unchallenged, emboldened by weakness. In Poland, this became a reality, but instead of surrendering, Polish soldiers responded with strength. No hotels, no handouts, no endless legal battles. They were forced to the ground and swiftly expelled. No exceptions, no apologies. Now ask yourself, why isn't Britain doing the same? Every day, boats packed with illegal migrants land on our shores. They know the system is soft, that our leaders lack the will to act. They're rewarded, not removed, welcomed into hotels, given taxpayer-funded lives while British families struggle. Where's the urgency? Where's the resolve? Poland's drawn a line. Britain must do the same. Stop the boats, close the loopholes, defend our borders. The time for weakness is over. The time for action is now. Write to your MPs, join peaceful protests, sign petitions, but whatever you do, make your voices heard.
I'm a dual citizen, Polish, US, and yesterday Poland elected a populist, radical right-wing, anti-democratic president. Its parliament and its prime minister are still centrist. And I'd like to talk about the parallels between Poland and the United States, which are stronger than most people recognize in terms of politics, and the always destructive nature of populism, left and right. Poland, like the United States, is a center-right to right-wing country relative to similar countries in Western Europe, and like the United States, at least since it joined the EU, has benefited greatly from international relations. When I was a kid, it was a dirt poor country. Now, when I go there, it's hardly recognizable. It's really impressive. But like the United States, even though Poland benefits greatly from international trade, populists, right-wing populists hate it. They want isolationism. And that's just like the United States with our populists. Even though this isolationism, all these tariffs are hurting our economy, the right wing doesn't care. And the problem with the right wing in Poland is not just economic, it's also geopolitical, just like the right wing in the United States. And even more improbably, the Polish right wing is in bed with Putin and Russia. And you gotta understand how self-destructive this is, because Poland twice has been under the thumb, under the yoke of Russia, lost its independence because of Russia for over a century. And yet this right-wing populist movement, anti-democratic, is strong in Poland, just like it is in the United States. And just like in the United States, it's the rural areas that tend to support the self-destructive right-wing populism. And just like MAGA, it's obviously ignorant, obviously self-destructive, both economically and geopolitically. It controls about half of the population. It's split right down the middle. Poland is. In 2023, nearly miraculously, the centrist part of Poland managed to rise up and beat back this destructive populist movement by winning back parliament and winning back the prime ministership. But here we are 2 years later, and this self-destructive right-wing populist movement has elected a president, which isn't as powerful as a prime minister, but still has significant impact. What's happening in Poland shows just how hard it is to dislodge right-wing populism once it takes hold. And that's going to be true in the United States. We're going to have to fight like hell to beat back the GOP and Donald Trump, get back our freedom.
While the world scrolls through TikTok and debates culture wars, the biggest military shift since World War II is quietly unfolding. And every major player is choosing a side. Here's what's happening simplified, but not dumbed down. The US can't fight everywhere anymore. America is stretched thin, so it's outsourcing its global dominance into regions. Russia, let Europe handle it. Middle East, let Israel do the dirty work. Asia, well, that's where the US is putting the big guns. The Pentagon's top priority isn't Russia, it's China. Europe is on Russia duty. After Ukraine, Europe is rearming at full speed. Germany, France, Poland, and even Finland are getting ready for war. NATO is no longer just a defensive alliance, it's becoming a military industry, rebuilding Eastern Europe for long-term conflict. The US is helping, but is slowly stepping back. Euro's job now is to contain Russia. Israel is the US enforcer in the Middle East. The US is still obsessed with Iran, but instead of sending troops, is sending billions to Israel. Israel handles the region, Gaza, Lebanon, Syria, and shadow wars with Iran. Meanwhile, the US gets to refocus its military firepower on China. Think of Israel as America's subcontractor for Middle East chaos. The Indo-Pacific, that's where the real game is. This is where the US is going all in. Why? Because China isn't playing games anymore. Building islands into military bases, threatening Taiwan daily, expanding its navy, nukes, and influence. So here is who's lining up. United States, bases in Japan, Philippines, Guam, and Australia, billions in weapons to Taiwan, new AUKUS alliance with UK and Australia. Australia, turning into the South Pacific fortress, buying nuclear submarines, hosting US military on their own land. Japan ending 80 years of pacifism, rearming, hosting US troops, planning counterstrikes. Philippines, letting US back in, blocking Chinese expansion in South China Sea. India is playing its own game, not official US ally, but clearly countering China in the Himalayas and Indian Ocean. This region is the chessboard for the next world war. All this is a giant global outsourcing operation. This isn't about defending democracy or promoting peace. It's a global power rearrangement. Each region is becoming a military puzzle piece, and the board is already set. We are not heading towards war by accident. We are being walked there, step by step, by a map that was drawn long ago. Were you worried about migration? Well, wait until Romania, Poland, and the Baltic states are being dragged into war against Russia, because then there will be much more migration.
Hey, if you're European, you should probably get ready for another wave of migrants. Farsi is a beautiful language. I love Persian, so I think you're going to love a few million more asylum seekers. Because if you haven't figured it out yet, this is kind of how it works. We, as in the United States, bomb Middle Eastern countries for Israel's security. We do that because Israel bought out all of our politicians. After we overthrow those governments, we rack on a few $1 trillion in debt, and you guys take the refugees. We went to war in Iraq for Israel. We racked on a few $1 trillion in debt. You guys took in the refugees. We backed the rebels in the Syrian civil Civil War, Germany took in 2 million Syrians. NATO backed the overthrow of Gaddafi, Italy took in over 1 million migrants. Iraq, Syria, Libya, what's the next big one? They want to displace Palestinians from Gaza. You guys will take in at least a decent amount of those refugees. Are you guys starting to recognize the root cause of this problem? Britain shoved in a parasite into the Middle East that sucks America dry financially. That parasite had to have the entire Middle East bombed to stay alive, and then you guys have to take in those asylum seekers to ensure that parasite's security. So if you guys have any ideas of how to stop this cycle, I'm all ears, but until then, enjoy forced diversity.
As I have said repeatedly, in my opinion, the Ukrainian war is a proxy war by the U.S. against Europe, or more precisely by the owners and controllers of global financialized capital against Europe, against the EU, with a particular focus on destabilizing and deindustrializing Germany. During his visit to the United States, the German Minister of Defense announced the signing of a large number of contracts with American arms and defense companies for the purchase of weapons and equipment amounting to approximately 23 billion euros. So they have a weapons shortage. Their industrial base is crumbling by the day. Capital outflows are at record highs. Bankruptcies are at record highs. And supposedly, their proposed solution is to ramp up military production, which is why they are fanning the flames of a potential NATO war with Russia. They want to create this hype. They want to create this panic and this frenzy about war with Russia, so to justify military spending and so on. But at the end of all of that, they end up just funneling money to American weapons manufacturers. Germany is considering mandatory military service for all citizens. So in other words, Germany doesn't have the weapons. As I said in the first story, they don't have the weapons and they don't have the military personnel for war. They don't have the manufacturing capacity to make the weapons, and they don't have the recruits for the army. They don't have willing, voluntary recruits for the army. So their solution to both of those problems: buy weapons from America and conscript the German people. So send your money to America and send your young people to war. And that's being touted, that's being sold as a plan for Germany's political and social and economic security and success. Several German MPs have supported the idea of using Western anti-aircraft systems from NATO countries to destroy Russian missiles over Ukraine. So while Germany is warning of a potential NATO-Russian war, they're actively actually promoting it. They're not warning about it. In fact, they're promoting it by advocating NATO's direct involvement in the Ukrainian conflict militarily. Very plainly, this again is because Europe is on the path to becoming a conflict zone itself, as I've talked about again many, many times. And this will just provide the US weapons sector a new market. They'll just pivot their destabilizing and military and conflict economy to Europe as the productive economy, and all productive economic activity pivots to the global south. The United States, and more specifically, as I said, the owners and controllers of global financialized capital, are very much interested in deindustrializing Europe, destabilizing Europe, impoverishing Europe, and subjugating Europe. The approach of America towards the global south, and the West towards the global south, but specifically America, their approach to the global south, whether it's Latin America, Africa, or Asia, their approach is now going to shift where they're going to be treating Europe the way they used to treat the Global South, and they're going to treat the Global South the way they used to treat Europe, including the militarization of Europe and trying to turn Europe into a conflict zone. And we know already from, if you've been following my other content, in my opinion, one of the core characteristics and drivers of the West's violence has always been the competition for material resources. So they are going to decrease Europe's access to material resources and then watch them fight each other. EU, the UK, all of America's Western so-called allies, they need to make an urgent reassessment of their relationship with the United States. Of course, this also means that the people of those countries in the EU and so on, they need to make a serious reevaluation of their own leaders, all of whom are just going along with America's plans, and who seem to be the only leaders left in the world who still think it's a good idea to follow Washington's orders. You know, 60% of Europeans no longer feel that America is a reliable ally or partner. That puts EU leadership at odds with the population in this regard. Even the European Council on Foreign Relations said that America's interests and Europe's interests no longer align, particularly on trade and security issues. And of course, they're right. America has been pursuing a systematic campaign of destabilization across Europe for years, and particularly since the Ukraine war and the Russian sanctions. I've been talking about that since the beginning. Thanks to these policies, Europe is in a death spiral. Bankruptcies are at record highs, business closures, home foreclosures, companies relocating, factories shutting down. I mean, Germany is in a rapid state of deindustrialization. America is trying to pit Europe against Russia, pit the UK against Russia, which is depriving the whole continent of affordable energy, and it's prompting militarization, which they can't afford, all of which is for the benefit of American oil and gas companies and for the U.S. weapons sector. People are becoming radicalized. Extremism of all stripes is emerging. You know, Europeans feel that their societies are more polarized than ever. Protests are taking place more frequently and are turning violent more frequently. Repression is getting worse. It's getting more severe. Terrorist attacks are increasing, particularly from far-right groups. The International Center for Counterterrorism attributes this, at least in part, to the war in Ukraine and the influx of neo-Nazis and other extremists and the flood of small arms that were supposedly being sent to Ukraine. The whole continent is sliding into a irreversible strife, and that's blatantly by American design. The U.S. is also trying to drive a wedge between Europe and China, even though Europe desperately needs Chinese investment, Chinese capital, Chinese technology, and the Chinese market for their own exports. And again, European leaders are just going along with this in defiance of their own populations and obviously against the interests of their own people, because EU leaders are subservient to Washington neocons. America always intended for the war in Ukraine to spread. They never intended for Ukraine to win. The whole point was always to accelerate Europe's destabilization, their isolation, and their deterioration. And so far, no one is doing anything whatsoever to pump the brakes. So yes, America and its so-called Western allies, the UK, the EU, are really at a make or break point. You know, people always talk about being on the right side of history. Well, Europe needs to start making decisions on the right side of the future, because their relationship with the United States has frankly put them into an existential crisis. The fact is, BRICS is building an alternative to the old US-led world order, and Britain and the EU need to understand this. The global system of the 20th century is a relic. The balance of power no longer favors the G7, and the Global South is the only vehicle left with wheels still on it and with a working engine. And Europe needs to hitch a ride with them if they don't want Uncle Sam to drive them off a cliff, because that's where they're going now. I mean, I know it's going to be a traumatic adjustment for these Westerners, for these Europeans, accepting the fact that your so-called Western civilization and your societies are actually unsustainable, and your great American protector and benefactor is actually cannibalizing you. But on the other hand, turning to the Global South for your survival isn't really anything new. I mean, you never would have actually even been anything of significance without your imperialism and colonization of Africa and Asia. So the truth is that you've always been a dependency, and you still are. The difference is that you used to get to pretend that you weren't the dependent one, because you used to be able to just steal from the global south in order to prop up your societies. But you've always been dependent. So there's no real change there. Just an attitude adjustment is necessary, and an acceptance of your real status vis-a-vis the global south. You will have to humble yourselves to some degree to cooperate with BRICS. But believe me, it's better than the utter humiliation that you're going to suffer if you continue cooperating with the Americans.
We trap him in a corner, and he feels his whole existence is a threat as leader of the Russian regime, then that is a very dangerous time for us all.
I mean, just look at how absurd this is. He's saying, correctly, that if you push Russia into a corner, it's not really wise. It's dangerous. It's dangerous for Europe. It's dangerous for everybody. They have 6,000 nuclear weapons. It's a nuclear power. You don't want to put them into a corner. Well, that's what you've been doing. That's what you've been deliberately doing, knowingly doing, completely conscious of the risks. You were warned in the United States, in Europe, the UK, warned by your intelligence services that Russia sees Ukraine as a red line. Ukraine joining NATO is a red line. They see it as an existential threat to Russia. You've been knowing that for 14 years. And you've insistently been pushing them into a corner. And now you're saying, if we push them into a corner, it's dangerous. That's what you've been doing. That's what you did do. Knowingly, deliberately, calculatedly.
I think it's really important. This is a dangerous time, a dangerous time across Europe. It's really important this doesn't become a conflict between NATO and Russia. And Putin can't turn it into an issue where it looks as though we are battling against Russia.
And now you're saying, we don't want this to become a conflict between NATO and Russia. Then why did you insist on the right of Ukraine to become a member of NATO? Why? Because it would immediately be a military conflict. None of you want to send troops. You don't want to send troops. You don't want to send fighter jets. You don't want to have a no-fly zone, because that will immediately become a military conflict between European countries, between NATO and Russia. Well, if you allowed Ukraine to become a member of NATO, then it would be. You would have to do that. You would have to send troops. You would have to send fighter jets. You would have to have a no-fly zone. You would have to do all of the things that you don't want to do now if you let Ukraine into NATO. But you don't want to do those things, which means you don't want Ukraine to be in NATO. If you had just said that from the beginning, then you wouldn't have this problem, because that is precisely the thing that Russia has always opposed and has always let you know is a red line for them. And it's the exact same thing, that one precise thing, that the West, that the U.S. refused to negotiate prior to this conflict. We can talk about everything, but we will not talk about the possibility, it's completely off the table, that Ukraine will be just a neutral country and not a member of NATO. We're not going to even discuss that. We have to continue to hold out the future possibility of Ukraine joining NATO. When the reality is, none of you want to go to war with your own troops, with your own fighter jets, against Russia for the sake of Ukraine. So you don't want them to be NATO. You don't want to be obliged to go to war with your troops and your fighter jets against Russia. Correctly, you shouldn't want to, but you don't want to do it. But you would have to do it if you let them join NATO, which means you were never going to let them join NATO in the first place. So why didn't you just say that? The entire thing is fabricated for the purpose of what is happening. What is happening now is what they wanted to have happen, because it was easily averted, could easily have been avoided. Everybody knows how to avoid it. Everyone knew how to avoid it for the last 14 years. Everyone saw it coming for 14 years, and you pursued it diligently until it happened. Meaning that what is happening now is exactly what you wanted to have happen.
What we're doing is we're supporting Ukraine in its independence and its self-determination and in its sovereignty.
I just wanted to say one thing about hypocrisy. You can talk about the hypocrisy of the West, you can talk about the hypocrisy of the United States and all of that, and it's all true, but you're not learning the lesson from that. To say, well, you didn't care about national sovereignty when you invaded Iraq. You didn't care about national sovereignty and independence when you invaded Afghanistan or any of the other places. You didn't care about it then. Why do you care about it now? That's true. That's all true. That is hypocritical. But it's only hypocritical if you actually think that the rhetoric means something to them. The principles don't mean anything to them. They didn't believe in national sovereignty when they invaded Iraq. They didn't believe in it when they invaded Afghanistan. And they don't believe in it now. That has nothing to do with the West's response, the collective West's response engineered by the United States to the conflict in Ukraine. It has nothing to do with it. That's just the sales pitch. That's just a rhetorical cover for a project of destabilization that has been pursued knowingly, calculatedly, deliberately for 14 years.
Security and peace, or peace with security, and how to end the carnage on the killing fields of Ukraine, where lives are being devoured by a ruthless mechanical precision. Let us reject outright Donald Trump's predatory seizure of Ukraine's natural resources. Let us campaign to get the whole of Europe, not just one country or another, out of NATO immediately. There is no point in NATO. It has been proven. Donald Trump has proven it. We should have proven it before Donald Trump. But we need to get out of NATO. Brussels needs to throw NATO into the sea. Let us plot a course to a non-aligned but never neutral Europe. A non-aligned but never neutral Europe. Offering to relax sanctions as carrot and return to Russia its $300 billion of frozen assets. We should immediately commence negotiations with the Kremlin and with Beijing on a comprehensive strategic arrangement between Europe, Russia, and China, an arrangement within which Ukraine becomes, in the next 100 years, what Austria was during the Cold War. What was Austria during the Cold War? It was sovereign, it was neutral, democratic, and as integrated with the rest of Europe as its citizens needed and desired. That's what the plan for Ukraine should be. On green prosperity, we must fiercely oppose military Keynesianism. It is unsustainable. The only thing it can produce is poverty, debt, and more crisis, not to mention war. We must fiercely oppose military Keynesianism, and we must replace it with a massive green investment program that combines development with degrowth. On dignity, let us campaign for a new monetary commons that sidelines private banks, offers a trust fund for everyone, and guarantees a universal dividend, call it a universal basic income, to each. On the big thorny issue of migration, let us turn the accusation of us being soft on foreigners into a virtue. Let us shout it from the rooftops that Europe without mass migration will die, it will perish, it will not be viable. Let us proclaim that we want migrants, not out of solidarity, but out of self-interest. In the last 9 years, Europe refused to democratize, and therefore today it is disintegrating. It is degenerating into a totalitarian war union. You can see that, you can smell it. This is what happens when you have austerity for the many and money printing as if there is no tomorrow for the very few. Mixed with this austerity, you have mind-numbing surges of inequality.
The Ukraine war has always been a proxy war by the United States against Europe. And in that regard, it has been a very successful war. From the perspective of the national OCGFC, the Ukraine war served at least two functions. First, the destabilization of Europe, and second, the strengthening of BRICS, which included for example, the creation and the proliferation of alternatives to SWIFT, different trading systems and so forth, the boosting of BRICS economies like India, like South Africa, like China, like the GCC, and so on, as well as Russia, as a result of the Russian sanctions, as well as advancing a sort of division of the globe into spheres of influence, with the global north, the west, and so forth, Europe and the European continent falling under American influence, and the rest of the world being for BRICS, the global south being for BRICS, or to simplify it, for China. The Ukraine war has been immensely powerful and immensely useful in accelerating the transition of the global economy that I've always been talking about. So what they're there to discuss in Riyadh, in my opinion, doesn't have so much to do with Ukraine as it has to do with managing the next steps of that transition. So the US is going to want to maintain the dependence of Europe. And that means negotiating the issue of Russian energy, because the only way to keep Europe energy dependent on the United States, which it is now, is to keep Russia or Russian energy out of the European market. See, it's a bit of a tricky thing for Russia because they're a major member of BRICS, but Russia is not a global south country geographically. So that means that Russia is going to share the global north. Basically, it's going to be shared between America and Russia, with the lines of those spheres of influence basically following the Soviet era pattern. I mean, peace and harmony between Russia and Europe is in the interests of both Russia and Europe, obviously, but not so much in the interests of the US, and not so much, arguably, not so much in the interests of BRICS. If Russia is allowed to normalize completely with Europe and become their major energy supplier, then that would drive the US out of the European market, and it would decrease Russia's vested interests in the success of BRICS itself, the BRICS project. So potentially resolving the Ukraine conflict could undo a lot of the progress that has been made towards the transition of the global economy. And I don't think anybody wants that. I don't think even Russia wants that. Now also, of course, for the GCC, for Saudi Arabia, they have a vested interest in all of this as well, because the lifting of sanctions against Russian energy would impact their own market share. Not Saudi Arabia so much, but the GCC. Their own market share in Europe and elsewhere. So in other words, what the Riyadh meeting was about, in my opinion, and what the upcoming meeting in Saudi Arabia between Trump and Putin will be about, essentially, isn't Ukraine, but it's negotiating the terms and setting up the dividing lines for the respective spheres of influence. Now, let me be clear here. These negotiations in Riyadh are not negotiations between enemies. These are not negotiations between people who are or who have radically conflicting views of the future. No. As I've said many times, Donald Trump is a representative of the A-national OCGFC. Putin and MBS are among the major leaders of the global transition of the global economy. And they are among those who will be the leaders in the new management system of international affairs. See, in the global south, as I've talked about before, business, the private sector, remains subordinate to the state for the most part. Or anyway, compared to the US and Europe, it's subordinate to the state. Compared to the US and Europe, where the state is subordinate to business. The A-national OCGFC are the product of the subordination of state power in the West to the private sector. That's why the A-national OCGFC exists. But when the A-national OCGFC deal with China, or they deal with Russia, or they deal with the GCC, they're dealing with players who hold power in both the private sector and in the state. And those players operate more according to nationalistic interests. They're sort of a regional nationalistic OCGFC in their own right. So unlike a Trump or a Biden or, any political leader in the West, a Putin, for example, is genuinely interested in the prosperity and the security of Russia. Xi Jinping is interested in China. MBS is interested in Saudi Arabia, and he's interested in the region, and so on. So they have a nationalistic element to them. Whereas Western leaders do not care about their countries. You see what I mean? So for instance, when Trump goes to Riyadh, he's not representing America, and he's not representing American interests. He's representing the A-national OCGFC, the A-national owners and controllers of global financialized capital. But Putin and MBS are representing the interests of their countries and the interests of their countries' private sector elites. And this is the whole negotiation that's going on over the transition of the global economy. This is the whole negotiation. It's between the national OCGFC coming from the West and the regional, more nationalistic OCGFC of different parts of the global South. And they're discussing how the global economy is going to be managed, how it's going to be managed between these factions. So for Trump, or whoever else might be in the White House at any given point, their only nationalistic concern will have to do with the military-industrial complex, which does continue to be, an economic force, and a force in American politics and policy making, though much less than in the past. So as I see it, they have at least two major issues to work out in Riyadh: the future of Europe and the future of the Middle East. The future of the Middle East obviously includes what to do about Israel and what to do about Gaza, which is why Stephen Witkoff was in Riyadh. I mean, he's Trump's envoy to the Middle East. He's the one who got Netanyahu to agree to the ceasefire. He has nothing to do with Ukraine. There's no real reason why he should be there, except that they're going to discuss the Middle East. So in my opinion, they're going to be talking about this. And they will be talking about this when they meet the next time. And because all of these issues are connected in one way or another. Europe, Ukraine, Russian energy exports, and the Middle East, Gaza, Israel, Palestine, so forth. In all of these issues, there are possible trade-offs. Possible trade-offs exist. These are all bargaining chips. So if you look at what each side wants to achieve in these negotiations, Trump, as a representative of the national OCGFC, he will want to keep Europe dependent on American energy exports. He will want animosity to continue between Russia and Europe, but with the United States sitting it out on the bench. He'll want the price of energy to decrease for his own domestic popularity, and he'll want access to Ukraine's minerals. He'll want Europe to become dependent also on weapons from the U.S., from U.S. manufacturers, and he'll want Europe to be cut off from China as much as possible. Further than that, he'll want guarantees that he's going to have a share. He himself and his family will have a share in the development of Gaza. He will want the global transition to proceed. He will want American containment to proceed. And he'll want the continued move towards de-dollarization. Don't believe the hype. And he'll want conflict in Europe and so on. So his bargaining chips in the negotiation are the Russian sanctions, U.S. trade policy towards China, American support for Israel, and their military posturing about Iran, among other things. For Russia, they will want control over the Ukraine. They will want restored access to the energy markets of Europe. And they want generally normalization of trade and business for all Russian companies. This is what Russia would like. Saudi Arabia will want continued access to European energy markets for the GCC. They will want to make sure that Russia's interest and commitment to BRICS will be preserved, and they'll want the establishment of a Palestinian state with Israel defanged. And of course, they'll want guarantees from the U.S. that there will be no interference by them in Bilad Hashem and in the broader Middle East, Syria, Iraq, and so on. Like I said, the U.S., or rather the national OCGFC, they want Europe to remain dependent, specifically on American energy. That's going to mean trying to limit Russian influence in European markets and trying to keep the EU on a short leash. They don't want Europe to be completely, destroyed, but they do want for Europe to be weakened, and they want Europe to be subordinate. They want it to be controlled. They want it to be completely within their sphere of influence. Second, they will want, as I say, Ukraine's resources, the minerals, the agricultural land, the energy reserves, and so on. This all has to be brought under Western corporate control. And this is what they want. And they want to keep China at a distance from Europe. The global economy is shifting, and Washington is trying to ensure that Europe won't gain any autonomy through building a relationship with China. So what kind of a deal should we expect? Most likely, Russia will keep the territories that they have taken, but they will allow Western economic access to Ukraine's resources. They'll go along with whatever deal is made between the U.S. and the Ukrainians with regards to that. The U.S. will drop their own support for Ukraine, but Europe most likely will continue to support Ukraine to ensure that the war just sort of drags on but never reaches a definitive conclusion and potentially can ignite conflicts elsewhere. Possibly some sanctions against Russia will be lifted, especially where it benefits multinational corporations. I think that energy prices will probably be stabilized for the right people. Oil prices will probably want to stay within a controlled range, as they always have, so that Saudi Arabia and Russia and the U.S. U.S. corporate interests all benefit, not America itself, but their corporate interests. Russia will probably retain limited access to the European market in terms of energy, but only in a way that doesn't undermine America's energy dominance. Just it's been the case like this all along, actually. Europe is going to be further weakened, and they're going to be further tied to the U.S. The U.S. will ensure that Europe remains militarily dependent upon the U.S. U.S. weapons manufacturers, increasing their purchases and so on of weapons, of American weapons. European industries are going to be completely locked into American energy supplies, preventing them from pivoting to Russia or to China. I think BRICS will continue to grow. The U.S. isn't interested in stopping BRICS expansion, but they will work behind the scenes to try to keep it somewhat financially fragmented. Saudi Arabia is going to stay aligned with BRICS, but they will also maintain their ties to Western financial systems. They're going to work on some sort of a deal about Gaza. I think that the U.S. and the Gulf are going to take control of the reconstruction with Gulf financing and with some American partners being involved. But I think that the plan for the Middle East, the plan for Gaza, the plan for Palestine, and that whole region is basically being worked out to the exclusion of the U.S. I think Saudi Arabia is going to have the major say over the political landscape in Gaza, alongside Egypt.
You're learning so many important things, and I'm so proud of you.
Panie, do Jaruzelskiego już mnie pan porównał, czekam jak mnie pan znów porówna do Hitlera.
Przepraszam bardzo, bo muszę to powiedzieć. PiS. To jest hasło wymuszone.
I przez to Polacy po wypiciu wódki mają finansowego kaca. Dziękuję. Co drugie słowo używa słowa kurwa. Jaki człowiek?
Panie pośle.
Przepraszam, panie marszałku, ale takie gówno zostawić obywatelom na następne lata.
Napominam po raz drugi pana posła.
Był taki człowiek, który chciał, żeby dzieciom polskim było lepiej. Nazywał się Adolf Hitler.
Przed wejściem do toalety, więc jak pani myśli, czy wszedłem tam przypudrować nosek, czy wymienić magazyn?
Takie kobiety reprezentujecie po prostu. Zwyrodniałe baby.
Mówię do pana posła Janusza Korwina-Mikke. Niech pan się obudzi, zapraszam pana głos. Super. Przepraszam, że panu przerwałem sen, ale po prostu czasami się tak zdarza.
Ile? Kostek? Lub. Klepie na wszystkie strony. Przynieść więcej, czy wystarczy? Nie, wystarczy. Chyba wystarczy. To się nazywa wolność, panie prezesie. Tak jest. Nie.
First of all, I can tell you. Okay.
Nie pytają cię o imię, walcząc o stręcieniem mgły.
Jeszcze Polska nie zginęła, póki my żyjemy.
Pani poseł Mirosława Nykiel, klub Koalicji Obywatelskiej. Panie pośle, pan nie ma maski, bardzo proszę opuścić.
Panie marszałku, pan
proszę mnie tu nie pluć na mnie.
Jest pan przestępcą, panie marszałku.
Bardzo się cieszę.
231 kodeksu karnego. Sądy Rzeczypospolitej
Panie pośle, niech pan mówi w tamtą stronę.
Twarzy.
Zobaczymy.
Niech pan poza ustalaniem tego, ile i na co pieniędzy wydać i skąd je wziąć, prawda? Bo władza nie ma przecież żadnych pieniędzy.
Ogłaszam 3 minuty. Wznawiam obrady. Pani poseł Mirosława Nykiel. Proszę mi nie pluć tutaj, dobrze?
Bardzo tak. O!
Panie pośle, proszę mi umożliwić wystąpienie.
Pani poseł, chusteczka.
Szanowna pani poseł, pani zajmuje czas przeznaczony dla mnie w tej debacie.
Cię odizoluję, dobrze? Trochę wypchnę.
Szanowny panie, proszę nie dokonywać inwazji w moją strefę intymną, dobrze? Szanowny panie marszałku, proszę wezwać Straż Marszałkowską, ponieważ w tej sali dokonuje się czynów przestępczych już całkiem seryjnie.
Ogłaszam kolejne 3 minuty przerwy.
Dziękuję bardzo, panie marszałku. Rozumiem, że straż jest w drodze.